Welcome back to the guided video tour of this document, the Timeline.pdf. In this video, we will continue looking at the section between the flood and the promise, and specifically we will be looking at and discussing BC dating and BC years. So you'll notice that BC years are included at various points on this timeline, typically at the century marks, but this chronology is not based on BC years, and there are several reasons for that. The first reason is they weren't using that system back then. It didn't exist yet. It couldn't have. BC counts backwards from an event that had not happened yet. The BC dating system was actually not even devised until 525 AD, and it was not widely in use until after 800 AD. However, if we want to know when was the city of Samaria conquered and taken by Assyria, if we look in an encyclopedia or a history book, or we look it up online, we're typically going to get a range of answers expressed in a BC number. But these numbers don't correlate to the records that we have from this time frame. For example, the scriptures tell us it was the 6th year of Hezekiah, which was also the 9th year of Hoshea, king of Israel, that Samaria was taken. Such and such year of King so-and-so. And in this point, we have a synchronism between Judah and Israel. The Mesopotamian Chronicles have a similar way of recording events. And here's one example. In the 7th year of Esarhaddon, on the 5th day of the month Adaru, the army of Assyria was defeated in Egypt. So again, such and such year of King so-and-so. Sometimes we're also given a month, sometimes we're also given a day of the month, depending on how specific the writer chose to be. And that's how we piece the timeline together. We notice here from the Assyrian and Babylonian Chronicles, in the 2nd year of Merodach-Baladan, who was the king of Babylon, Humbanekas, king of Elam, battled Sargon, king of Assyria. And then we see in the 5th year of Merodach-Baladan, Humbanekas died after ruling Elam for 26 years, and then Suder-Nahant ascended the throne in Elam, and he reigned 18 years. But the BC numbers don't correlate to the records that we have from that time frame, and when we get a small range of numbers, we don't have any way of verifying which one of these might be correct. Which brings us to the second reason why we're not using BC dates, and that is assigned BC dates are often based on speculation and they're subject to change. Ptolemy's Canon of Kings begins when Nebuchadnezzar took the throne in Babylon and continues forward from there. Ptolemy's canon was preserved by an astronomer named Claudius Ptolemy as a tool for dating astronomical events like solar eclipses and lunar eclipses. Ptolemy's canon is also not based on BC years, and that's because even though Claudius Ptolemy was born in Alexandria about 100 AD, he still predated the BC dating system by several hundred years. Berossus, who lived in Babylon in 300 BC, he was a Babylonian priest. He was also an astronomer like Ptolemy, and he was a chronicler. And he tells us that Nebuchadnezzar, when he took the throne in Babylon, that he collected and destroyed all the records of the Babylonian kings that reigned before him. So it's not surprising that that's the point where Ptolemy begins his list. Also, in the Assyrian and Babylonian Chronicles, in ABC 1, section 1, verse 1 begins with Tiglath-Pileser taking the throne in Assyria in the 3rd year of Nebuchadnezzar. Similarly, we have good synchronisms with the kings of Egypt from this point forward as well. Now we can continue to follow the Assyrian kings back farther using the Limu list. And the Limu list, although it does not give us the detail that the Chronicles give us, where the Chronicles will typically give us a paragraph or two of information, in the Limu list each year is represented, and we'll typically get a small amount of information, something like a military campaign, or the end of a king's reign will be noted, or solar eclipse, or something of that nature. And we can follow the kings back in Assyria to the reign of Jehu using the Limu list. And that's about halfway between here and when the kingdom divided after Solomon. From that point, we can continue using the Assyrian king list, and we can get all the way back to the end part of the Judges between Jephthah and Samson. The Assyrian king list gives us even less information, typically just the name of the king and the years that he reigned. And at that point, right after Jephthah, we run into a couple of kings where it's not specific about the length of their reign. We run into a couple of kings where it says something like he reigned a short while or something like that. Now, Hammurabi was a famous king that reigned over both Assyria and Babylon about 1,000 years before the beginning of Ptolemy's Canaan, and he is famous for giving the law code of Hammurabi. Here's a picture of a stele that has the law code of Hammurabi inscribed all over this basalt stele, and this monument stands about a little over 7 feet tall, not quite 7.5 feet tall. It was discovered in Elam and broken in 3 pieces. You can see where they put it back together, the cracking across the middle and down. This piece is located now in the Louvre Museum in France. Now as we zoom in, you can see the cuneiform script in the Akkadian language that this law code was written in. It's a very famous historical piece. Now if we want to know what year did Hammurabi start his reign, if we look that up, we're going to get a range of answers depending on if you follow the Assyrian long chronology or the mid chronology or the low chronology or the ultra low chronology, which is another way of saying we're not really sure. So we can see that the farther back in history that we go, the more fragmented the records are and the more difficult it is to piece everything together accurately. And that's the second reason why we're not using BC dates for this chronology. And that's because assigned BC dates are often based on speculation and they're subject to change. The third reason we're not using BC dates for this timeline is there are different starting points for different calendars. BC dating is based on the Julian calendar. The Julian calendar was given to us in 46 BC by Julius Caesar and was in use all the way until 1582 AD, at which point Pope Gregory introduced the Gregorian calendar, which is widely in use today, almost universally worldwide. After Babel, different nations used different calendars. The Sumerians and the Babylonians, as well as Israel, used a lunar calendar that began in the spring. But the starting point of the Julian calendar is January 1st, with the start of spring just after the middle of March. That's a 2.5 month difference between the start of these two calendars. To illustrate how these calendars don't line up, we have a record in the Limu list of a solar eclipse in the 10th year of Ashur-dan. Solar eclipses happen frequently, but the narrow path of totality limits their frequency for any given location to once every 100 years or so. Using computer models, we can accurately predict when and where solar eclipses will happen in the future, and we can also look back in time and know when and where they occurred in the past. The eclipse in Ashur-dan's 10th year can be identified as occurring on June 15th, 763 BC. If we count back from June 15th to January 1st, we can see where 763 BC begins and ends. The years don't line up exactly. They're 2.5 months off. Now let's say that a king from another country took the throne in the 9th month of Ashur-dan's 9th year, but he's killed in the 11th month of Ashur-dan's 10th year. His reign might be recorded as from Ashur-dan's 9th to 10th year. But if converted to BC, it would be expressed from 764 BC to 762 BC because of where the months fall. Now let's say a completely different hypothetical king in a hypothetical country started his reign also in Ashur-dan's 9th year, but he started in the 11th month, and then he was subsequently killed in the 9th month of Ashur-dan's 10th year. This king's reign would also be recorded as from Ashur-dan's 9th to 10th year, But now, when converting to BC, his entire reign falls within 763. So we can see that different starting points of calendars can make converting to BC difficult. But it's even more complicated when we consider that the starting points of each calendar will fluctuate and be in a different spot from year to year. And that's because no calendar matches a year perfectly. All calendars need some form of adjustment because a year is 365.2422 days. That's how long it takes for the Earth to go around the Sun and go through all 4 seasons. The Julian calendar of 365 days is almost a quarter day short every year. So every 4 years on leap year, an extra day is added to the end of February to keep the calendar in line with the tropical or solar year. It's still not perfect because the Julian calendar is 365.25 days, not 0.2422 days, making it slightly longer than a solar or tropical year. The Gregorian calendar addressed this issue by eliminating 3 leap years every 400 years, making it 365.2425 days, much closer. As we noted in the last segment, the lunar calendar began in the spring about 2.5 months after the start of the Julian calendar. But unlike the Julian calendar, which was off by a quarter day every year, the starting point of the lunar calendar varied by at least 11 days from year to year. This is because 12 lunar months are 11 days short of a year. But there's no option of adding 11 days to the year because the first of each month must coincide with the new moon. Instead, an entire month must be added every few years. This leaves a wide variance in where the beginning of the lunar year might fall, making it even more difficult to make an accurate conversion into BC years. So those are the main reasons we're not using BC dates for this chronology. While we're on the subject of calendars, it's interesting to note that the Egyptians used a 365-day calendar, but unlike the Julian calendar, which added a day every 4 years, there was never any leap year for correction. So the Egyptian calendar would drift, and every 4 years it would be off by another day. After 1460 years, this drift comes full circle, and the Egyptian calendar is off by a whole year, but it's back in line with the seasons. Now, this drift may not have been noticed for a long period of time, and that's because Egyptian life relied on the annual flooding of the Nile, and the beginning date of the annual flood was very unpredictable from year to year. The Nile River overflowed its banks every year, providing vital soil nutrients and water for agriculture. It didn't rain in Egypt, but the reliability of the Nile flood earned Egypt the nickname the breadbasket of the world. As trustworthy as the annual flood was, when it would begin each year was a mystery, and could vary by as much as 80 days. So the Egyptian calendar drifting by only 1 day every 4 years could have gone unnoticed for quite a while. Hundreds of years could pass before the Nile flood was definitely in a different season. So we've gone over some of the reasons why we're not using BC dates for this chronology. When we do run across an occasional BC number in this timeline, just remember that even though the format of this spreadsheet ensures preciseness with each row representing a year, any stated BC number will not fall entirely or completely within that row, but will also be contained partially in an adjacent row, typically the row before. Well, thanks for joining us for another video. Tune in next time. We'll continue the time frame between the flood and the promise. We should be able to wrap that up. We're going to focus on the year that Abraham was born and when he's 75 at the time of the promise. Make sure to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any upcoming videos. And thanks again for tuning in.